Welcome to the Deep Dive. Get ready to maybe shift your perspective a bit on the history of science and technology. Because today we're digging into a period that's, well, absolutely foundational, but maybe doesn't always get the spotlight, the medieval Islamic world. We've got this fascinating stack of sources here, history articles, science deep dives, lists of inventions. It's quite a collection. Think of it like a treasure map, helping us piece together a richer picture than maybe you got in school.
Exactly. And our mission today really is to navigate this treasure trove with you. We want to go beyond just saying golden age. We're aiming to uncover the specific, the tangible innovations, the brilliant people behind them, and crucially, their lasting impact. We want to show you how this era built on ancient knowledge and then laid critical groundwork for the world we live in. How knowledge travels, really.
Right. By the end of this, you'll hopefully have a much clearer sense of why this period earned that golden age label. We've got some genuinely surprising facts from the sources. Okay, so let's unpack this. Where should we start? Maybe with the absolute building blocks?
Sounds good. Mathematics seems like the place.
Yeah, our sources keep bringing up mathematics. And one name, Al-Khwarizmi, pops up again and again, credited with founding algebra as a discipline. What does that actually mean, to found it?
That's a great question because, algebraic ideas existed before him in the 9th century, but they were kind of scattered techniques. Al-Khwarizmi was the first to treat it as its own field, give it structure, a formal system. The word algebra itself, it comes from Al-Jab, part of the title of his big book.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just doing the sums, it was creating the whole system.
Precisely. He introduced systematic ways to solve linear and quadratic equations, including completing the square, which you probably remember. And crucially, he didn't just give the methods, he provided clear geometric justifications. He showed why it worked, made the logic clear.
And this wasn't just like abstract theory for scholars, right?
Yeah.
The sources stress the practical side.
Oh, absolutely, not just theory. This systematic approach was vital for, well, everyday life and complex societal needs back then. Think figuring out inheritance shares according to Islamic law, dividing land accurately, calculating distances for trade, figuring out prices, essential tools for a complex society.
Right. Makes sense. And this knowledge, did it just stay there?
Far from it, the influence was massive. Translations of Al-Khwarizmi's work became core texts in European universities for centuries. So there's a really direct pathway for these algebraic systems becoming fundamental to Western math, a clear line from him to, the math you learned.
Wow. Okay. So from earthly calculations, let's look up astronomy. Another huge area highlighted in these sources. And again, not just intellectual curiosity, it was deeply practical. And religious, too.
That's key, yeah. You needed astronomy for determining prayer times accurately, finding the exact direction of the Kaaba in Mecca. And for navigation, obviously, across vast trade routes, all that demanded precise astronomical knowledge. It fueled intense study. And one major development was the observatory itself. The sources describe them evolving into these dedicated scientific institutions with specialized gear, staff, systematically collecting data over long periods, kind of like early research institutes.
So they use this data to, what, check and refine older knowledge?
Right.
Like from the ancient Greeks, Ptolemy?
Exactly. Take Ibn Yunus, 10th century Egypt. He made really significant corrections to Ptolemy's calculation for the Earth's wobble, precession. Ptolemy had it at 1 degree per 100 years. Ibn Yunus, through careful observation, got it much closer, 1 degree per 70 years.
That's a big jump in precision for back then.
It really is. And the theory kept advancing, too. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, 13th century, developed the Tusi couple, which is this brilliant geometrical model showing how you could get linear motion just by combining two circular motions.
Huh. Linear motion from circles.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is that specific model, Copernicus used it later in his heliocentric system. So you see this abstract mathematical idea traveling centuries later and influencing a totally different scientific view. Pretty amazing.
And Ibn al-Haytham, whose name keeps coming up, we'll get to him with optics, but he's mentioned here too, helping with telescopes.
Yes, his work on light and vision was crucial groundwork, definitely. And their understanding of the Earth itself was pretty sophisticated. Sources mention a strong consensus among Muslim scholars about the Earth being round. They cite figures like Ibn Hazm, al-Kindi, even interpretations of the Quran. And al-Biruni, 11th century, he didn't just calculate the Earth's diameter really accurately. He actually hypothesized that there must be a landmass, a continent on the other side of the world to, balance things out, long before Europeans proved the Americas existed.
Wow, predicting a continent based on calculation. Incredible. And this knowledge fed into tools for exploration.
Absolutely. Navigational tools were critical. The Kamal, for instance, came about around the late 9th century with Arab sailors. It allowed the earliest known latitude sailing using measurements, not just guessing, a huge step in quantitative navigation. And they developed and refined other tools like the sign quadrant, various astrolabes. People like Al-Zarqali in Spain were key figures there. These were like the GPS of their time.
Okay, let's shift focus now, something fundamental. Caring for the human body. Healthcare. The sources show a really revolutionary approach.
They really do. What jumps out from these materials is the emergence of what we'd basically recognize as a public hospital system. The big early example cited is Ahmad ibn Tulun's hospital in Cairo, founded way back in 872.
And the key thing the sources stress is that these places gave free care to everyone, regardless of status, religion, background. This came from the Islamic tradition of charity, right? Not just for the rich.
Exactly, serving the whole community. And they were more than just places to keep sick people. The sources describe them as centers for treatment, yes, but also for training new doctors, for medical research, for study. This model spread everywhere: Spain, Persia.
And they treated all sorts of conditions. I saw something about mental health care.
Yes, that often surprises people. Ahmad ibn Tulun's hospital in Cairo. It specifically had a ward for the insane. And the sources mention they used treatments like music therapy. Pretty forward-thinking.
Beyond the hospitals themselves, there were big leaps in understanding the body and disease.
Definitely. Figures like Ibn al-Nafi's 13th century gave a much more detailed picture of how the body works than the old Greek texts. He described metabolism, for example, as this continuous state of dissolution and nourishment. That's quite a sophisticated idea for the time.
And they tested treatments. They didn't just accept old ideas.
No, that's another area where they were remarkably modern. Avicenna, huge figure, 11th century in his Canon of Medicine, he actually described principles that sound a lot like clinical trials for testing drugs. He laid out criteria for figuring out if a medicine really worked.
The sources also list some incredibly specific practical things, especially in surgery.
Right. This brings us to Abul Qasis, or Al-Zahrawi, from 11th century Islamic Spain. His encyclopedia, Al-Tazrif, was massive, hugely influential. It covered surgery, dentistry, gynecology, loads more. And when it was translated into Latin, it became the surgical textbook in Europe for centuries. He described detailed procedures for amputation, wound treatment, crushing bladder stones. He identified hemophilia as hereditary. He described using silk thread for internal stitching sutures, basically. He even made false teeth from animal bones. Early orthodontics, maybe?
That's just astonishingly practical.
And there's more. He devised obstetrical forceps. And crucially for teaching, he created detailed illustrations of surgical tools, some of the earliest known examples specifically for training surgeons.
What about infectious diseases? Things like smallpox, the plague, the big killers.
Another area where observation led to breakthroughs, Abu Bakr al-Razi, 9th, 10th century, wrote what sources call the first truly scientific study of infectious diseases. He carefully compared smallpox and measles based on symptoms, its influence. His book was printed in English 40 times between 1498 and 1866. Shows how important it was. Then later, 14th century, during the Black Death, Ibn al-Khatib watched how it spread. He explicitly said it was a contagion, transmitted through contact, which was radical then. It challenged the idea it was just divine punishment.
So moving towards a scientific idea of contagion.
Exactly. And Ibn Rushd, Averroes, another giant, added that surviving smallpox gave you immunity, fundamental for vaccination later on.
And treatments? What about plants, natural stuff?
Pharmacology and botany were highly developed. Ibn Baitar, 13th century, from Spain. He traveled everywhere collecting plants. His big book described 1,400 different substances, 300 of them totally new to the known pharmacopoeia then. A huge work on botany and pharmacy. Ibn Zur also compiled a big pharmacopoeia and stressed things like diet and clean air for health. And just a couple more quick medical firsts from the sources. Ibn Zur, first clear description of the itch mite causing scabies, and first to describe feeling pain in bones. And Ibn Rushd, Averroes again, first to correctly identify the retina's function as the photoreceptor in the eye, where light is actually detected.
It's so clear their focus was both theoretical and super practical. Okay, let's shift gears again. Ingenious devices, daily life tech.
Yeah, this section is full of aha moments. The sources show this incredible period of mechanical invention, often building on older ideas but pushing them way further, especially automation.
Like the Banu Musa brothers.
Yes, 9th century. Their Book of Ingenious Devices describes these complex automatic machines. They took Greek concepts, but added automatic controls. They're credited with inventing things like the conical valve, double seat valve, throttling valve, crucial components for controlling fluid flow automatically, and early variable control systems.
Devices that regulate flow on their own? That sounds really advanced for the 9th century.
It was. And then there's the crank mechanism. Now, simple hand cranks existed earlier, sure, but the Banu Musa put automatic cranks in their hydraulic machines. But the really revolutionary step came later, documented by Ismail al-Jazari in the 13th century. He systematically designed and applied the crank and connecting rod system.
Okay, why was that so revolutionary?
Because that combination efficiently converts rotary motion spinning into linear motion back and forth. It's fundamental to so many machines: lifting, pumping, driving things. Al-Jazari described using it for lifting heavy stuff, powering water pumps, ideas that became widespread. And back in 11th century Spain, Ibn Basal used the mechanical flywheel in irrigation, letting them lift water from much deeper wells.
So these weren't just clever toys. They were used for industry.
Absolutely. Sources mention water mills with steel gears working on an industrial scale by the 11th century. And key industries grew around these power sources. Sugar mills, for example, first appeared in the Islamic world. First water-powered, then later windmills.
Windmills.
Yep. Windmills plus wind-powered grist mills for grain and wind pumps for irrigation popped up in places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran around the 9th, 10th centuries. An alternative power source where water was scarce.
And chemistry had practical uses too, not just theory.
Definitely. Building on earlier work, people like Jabir ibn Hayyan were actually synthesizing compounds like sal ammoniac in labs. And Al-Razim, again, the medical guy, he also did chemistry. 9th century, he described distilling crude oil, yes, oil, into kerosene. He used an alembic apparatus, which he improved, and then he described a simple kerosene lamp, literally bringing light from this new fuel.
What about things closer to our everyday lives now?
Oh, there's some great examples. The toothbrush. Sources mention Prophet Muhammad using a miswak twig around 600 AD. It apparently had freshening properties too, so dental hygiene goes way back. Another big one. Hard soap. Soap existed, but they developed an industry making hard, pleasant-smelling soap. Recipes used things like glycerin from olive oil. This quality soap, made by reacting oils with alkali, became a major export to Europe.
Cleanliness as an export. And drinks. You mentioned soft drinks.
Yes. Not Coca-Cola, obviously, but Shardat. These were fruit-flavored drinks sweetened with sugar, syrup, honey, hugely popular. The English word syrup, it comes from the Arabic sharab. And these drinks were exported and became popular in medieval Europe, too.
Let's loop back quickly to optics. Ibn al-Haytham's work wasn't just theory, you said.
Not at all. Around the year 1000, he completely changed how we understand vision. He proved with experiments that we see because light reflects off things and enters our eyes, overturning that old Greek idea that eyes shot out rays.
That's a massive shift in thinking.
Huge. And it had practical spin-offs. He invented the camera the dark chamber. That's the basic principle behind photography, cameras. He also explained how the eye sees upright images even though the light enters inverted. And his understanding of lenses and light helped pave the way for telescopes later. He also described the convex lens as a magnifying glass back in 1021. And building on his work, later scholars like Esmail Jorjani identified things like the optic chiasm, where nerves cross in the brain.
Thinking about how all this knowledge spread, one thing seems totally central: paper.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Paper-making tech came from China to the Muslim world, 8th century, then to Spain and Europe by the 10th. It was a total game changer. Paper was way easier and cheaper than parchment, animal skins, and better than papyrus for ink.
And that revolutionized the key thing for any age of learning.
Books, exactly. It made producing and copying books so much more accessible and affordable. It wasn't just about the material, it fueled the whole engine of learning.
Which brings us right to that engine room. The libraries, the culture of learning, how knowledge moved.
Yeah, the sources paint this amazing picture, a society that really valued learning, valued books. Take Caliph Al-Hakam II's library in Cordoba, Spain, 10th century. Sources say it had 400,000 volumes. The catalog alone was 44 volumes long. They paid huge sums for rare books, employed armies of scribes, binders, scholars, including women, interestingly, as copyists and scholars. And the scale, Cordoba apparently had 70 public libraries, bookshops everywhere buzzing with intellectual life. Literacy wasn't just for the elite. Sources suggest it was pretty widespread, even among workers, a big contrast with much of Europe then.
But with all the changes over centuries, what happened to all those books?
Well, sadly, some collections were lost or destroyed, that's true. But it's also amazing that around 250,000 Arabic manuscripts still exist today, preserved in libraries across Europe and the East. Their survival really shows their importance. and the knowledge is still there to be studied. And having paper, especially from big mills like in Jativa, Spain, meant they could copy books fast. Cordoba apparently churned out huge numbers annually. And the scholars themselves, incredibly prolific writers. Averroes, Ibn al-Khatib, Ibn Hazm, hundreds of works across multiple fields.
And a huge part of this engine was translating, right? Moving knowledge around deliberately.
Absolutely vital. Sources highlight the key role of scholars, especially Nestorian Christians early on, translating Greek science and philosophy into Syriac, then Arabic. They saved a vast amount of ancient knowledge that might have just vanished. But the flow wasn't just one way. Here's a fascinating point from the sources. Until the Renaissance, Arabic was the most translated language in the world, both in the number of books translated from it and the number of languages they went into. This huge wave of translation from Arabic into Latin was fundamental for Europe's Renaissance and scientific revolution. Think of Gerard of Cremona, 12th century. He translated over 70 crucial books: Al-Khwarizmi's Algebra, Al-Zarawi's Medicine, astronomical tables. Ibn Rushd's commentaries on Aristotle were essential university texts. Ibn Baytar's Botany, Al-Khalasadi's Algebra, it just poured into Europe.
So massive creation and massive intentional sharing. What kind of mindset drove all this?
The sources give clues there too. A big emphasis on observation, experiment, critical thinking. Ibn al-Haytham, the optics guy again, he wrote that an investigator's duty is to make himself an enemy of all that he reads, attack it from every side. He should also suspect himself. End quote. That sounds remarkably like the scientific method, right? Relying on evidence, questioning everything, not just accepting authority. And it's interesting how interdisciplinary people were. Scholars were often polymaths. Mathematicians were philosophers and musicians. Physicians were poets. Knowledge wasn't locked in boxes. You even see this integration in art and architecture. Sources mention things like bridge mills using mechanical principles, and complex geometric patterns in mosaics that needed sophisticated math, even anticipating later discoveries in tiling theory. Calligraphy wasn't just writing, it was art on coins, textiles, knowledge woven into culture.
Wow. Okay, stepping back, looking at everything we've just unpacked from these sources. Algebra, astronomy foundations, public hospitals, advanced surgery, those ingenious machines, early photography ideas, soft drinks even, plus the whole library and translation network. That is an incredible breadth and depth of contribution.
It truly is. This deep dive really shows a period of intense intellectual ferment, innovation, scholarship. It wasn't just preserving old ideas, it was a dynamic era, creating foundational principles, technologies across so many fields, and then crucially, consciously transmitting them, directly influencing Europe, shaping the modern world in ways, maybe many of us aren't fully aware of.
It definitely makes you want to rethink some standard timelines of history.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into these incredible sources.
My pleasure. And maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on, building on all this. How might our understanding of, the whole story of science and technology change if we more fully appreciated these threads of knowledge connecting different cultures, different times like the ones we've explored today, instead of maybe seeing history as just a series of separate light bulb moments?